Musk, what he says, his real goal is to not go bankrupt. I mean, the business case is not a slam dunk. But obviously, all those people that are putting a lot of money into it think there's a good chance.
Okay, I think we need to get moving on the formal programming. Larry, can you stop sharing, please?
Actually, oh yeah, it's up on the top now. Let's see, new share, no, pause share. Stop share. How's that?
That's great. Someone please take a screenshot to, let's see, it's all 6 of us. May as well do that now. Smile, 1 sec.
Yeah, come on.
All right. Yeah, let's get this on the road. Eleanor, are we live? Let's assume that we are.
Yes, please. Live streaming has already started.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Great. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the 2020 Internet Governance Forum. I want to thank you for joining us near the end of this forum, just before the big APC party. And I want to thank the organizers of this ambitious virtual convening. I think this year we're really showing, the power of the internet and our dependence on it. We're happy to convene this panel on the promise and perils of satellite internet. We all already use satellite services. They're essential to delivering location data. Mapping your daily run or bike ride and predicting whether it will rain this weekend may depend on satellites already, as well as the delivery of television and global news channels that we all depend on. But satellite imaging also tracks everything from deforestation and migrations to military invasions and even the sites of atrocities. We saw Amnesty International did so last week in Ethiopia with their report based in part on satellite internet pictures. Satellite-based internet services have been a dream since at least the 1990s. However, to date, satellite internet service is too expensive and too slow for mass uptake. Satellite internet has not significantly helped bridge digital divides or expand connectivity to the billions that remain offline. The world will not reach the Sustainable Development Goal sub-target 9C to connect all those in least developed countries to the internet by 2020. We've got about 6 weeks. However, we are now seeing the launch of thousands of small, low Earth orbit satellites with the intent to bring faster internet services to new places. This trend will continue as billionaires race to launch 50,000 new satellites this decade. It's time that we take satellite internet services more seriously and understand how they may impact human rights, peace and conflict, the environment, and development. To do so, we've got a diverse panel today with a wide range of experience. I think that satellite internet providers and regulators alike should consider the counsel of this diverse panel of experts as you develop business and regulatory models. I'll first turn to Felicia Antonio from Access Now to set the stage. She'll tell us about some of the obstacles to universal internet connectivity from her perspective. Then we'll go to a presentation by Larry Press, so we have a basis of knowledge about what satellite internet services are. So without further ado, Felicia, can you tell us a bit more about what's keeping people offline and what's disrupting access in 2020?
Thank you so much, Peter, for organizing this session. It's really timely and very important given the situation in which we find ourselves today. So throughout the obstacles that 2020 has thrust upon us, one key message, as you indicated in your opening remarks, is the fact that the importance of the internet has been underscored, and especially because at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, governments or many governments resorted to the use of lockdowns or other confinement measures in order to contain the spread of the virus, and also to ensure that people had access to life-saving information, as well as education and businesses all moved online. And this wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have this important tool called the internet and other digital communications platforms. And so as COVID-19 or the effect of COVID-19 on our daily lives lengthens, governments, regional and international actors continue to stress the importance of the internet and the fact that there's a need to press for safeguards to ensure that more and more people are connected globally. Despite these efforts, we've seen that over 3.8 billion of the world's population are yet to get online, while many of those who manage to get online struggle to stay connected due to expensive data plans, poor and slow service, and government mandated internet shutdowns. And as you rightly mentioned, we are far from reaching the goal, the SDG goal, sub-goal 9, by which seeks to ensure that everyone is connected everywhere by 2020, since we have just 6 weeks to end the year. But then there's still more hope. And as an enabler of other rights, including the right to freedom of expression, to access information, freedom of opinion and expression, the internet must continue to be at the center stage of combating this pandemic. And then also the importance of the internet is further highlighted in SDG 17, which acknowledges that innovative technology development and reliable data are crucial to reach the goals, and that special or cooperative efforts will best serve the people in developing countries who need it most. However, as I've indicated, as we all struggle to get everyone connected, some governments are actively hindering these efforts by implementing repressive measures such as hacking, surveillance, internet shutdowns, and digital identity programs to draw back these efforts and further widening the digital divide across the globe. For instance, despite the impacts or devastating impact of internet shutdowns on human rights, on businesses, on economies, education, and health, data curated by the Keep It On Coalition, which is a global network of organizations working to end internet shutdowns, and documented by Access Now's shutdown optimization and shutdown stories projects, show that internet shutdowns are increasing across the globe, they are lasting longer, and more people are being affected. And then they are also used to target vulnerable or minority groups. And so in 2019, we recorded a total of 213 incidents in 33 countries of shutdowns. Recently, we've seen in this year that shutdowns that actually began in 2019 are still ongoing, while governments in countries like Ethiopia, Tanzania, Guinea, Burundi, and Belarus have already shut down the internet this year during elections or during protests. And so most of the justifications governments that have disrupted these communication devices are normally given as the need to ensure national security, but in actual sense, shutdowns have serious implications on human rights and other aspects of people's lives. And also with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's also been the introduction of contact tracing applications, the use of biometric and health-related data, and other tech-driven interventions to contain the spread of the virus. Unfortunately, some of these measures have resulted in increased surveillance, on human rights and serious breaches to people's personal and private information or data. And then also the lack of access disproportionately affects already underserved and at-risk communities such as women and girls, people in racial and ethnic minority groups, rural and indigenous populations, and people with disabilities. Although the global connectivity by the end of 2020 is very unlikely to be achieved, we can strive to get the world connected by 2030. And to do so, we must amplify our efforts with innovation in order to achieve that. Governments must provide relevant infrastructure to ensure secure, high quality and high speed connectivity, prioritize digital literacy, and invest in the internet infrastructure in order to boost access. A human rights-centric satellite internet may be the missing piece. Telcos and internet service providers may play a key role in this ambitious plan and have the responsibility to support more people to get online by providing quality and uninterrupted services, and most importantly, implementing human-centric business models across the globe. And increasingly, we've seen that ISPs are becoming complicit in violating human rights of users as they continue to give in to government demands to restrict these rights in countries where they operate. As we explore how satellite internet service providers can contribute to getting more people online, it is also essential for us to do so while ensuring that people have access to open, secure, and quality internet without further endangering them, the rights that we are fighting for. Let's make sure we do not recycle the very challenges we are currently having with ISPs providing internet connections through fiber optic and cable services. And it is crucial to advance this process while upholding and expanding human rights in the digital age. It is my hope that my co-panelists, experts in this sector, will be able to throw more light on this subject and convince civil society that satellite services could contribute significantly to bringing more people online in a safe and effective manner. Because one thing is certain, what we do today to ensure an open and accessible internet, including the proliferation of satellite services, will contribute to a digital tomorrow where connectivity won't be a discussion topic. It will be a guarantee. And so I'm hoping to really see how we dive the conversation towards how satellites can contribute significantly in connecting more and more people, and even possible in helping people that find themselves in countries where the internet is being disrupted, how it can enable them to circumvent internet shutdowns or disruptions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicia. I think you really laid out the gauntlet there and set the bar high for what we expect and hope from this sector. We've already got questions coming up in the chat, and so I think it's right to throw to Larry for a presentation on what satellite internet has been and where it might be going. So please share.
Okie doke.
Larry is Professor Emeritus of Information Systems at California State University, Dominguez Hills.
And okay, can you guys see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to give a really quick overview of the whole field, what's going on with these low Earth orbit LEO satellites as far as the internet goes. I'll run really fast through this. We can come back to some in the discussion, but if anybody wants, I've got an annotated version of this presentation, which I can just send you. You can see my email there, just request it. Okie doke. These are the 5 kind of topics. I'm going to do 5 slides, 5 topics. Orbit characteristics is the first one, and we'll end up talking about the role of the UN at the end. Okay, so what are these low Earth orbiting satellites? What you're used to today, if you have internet connectivity with a satellite, is what's shown down here, geostationary satellite. And geostationary satellite has some problems and it has some advantages. As you can see, the altitude of a geostationary satellite is 22,000 miles, whereas these lower satellites are often well under 1,200 miles. And there's some good news and some bad news with that. The big advantage is that the orbit time, the time it takes it to go around the Earth, is 24 hours. And what that means is the satellite appears to be fixed in the sky from any point on Earth. And that's got 2 really nice advantages. It means that there's a large footprint for the satellite. You can see a big portion of the Earth at any one time. And another one is that the terminal is simple. A $50 terminal can be bolted to your roof or to a pole, pointed once, and it never has to move. That's all good news. The bad news is this column here called latency, and that is that it's slow. To get a packet of data from the Earth up to the satellite or from the satellite back down to Earth takes about 1/4 of a second. And that's difficult for some applications. Low Earth orbit satellites, that's what we're talking about today. Their latency is only maybe 20, 25 milliseconds, and the orbital time is 2 hours and so forth. The thing that's key about this latency is that makes it possible to do interactive applications, the kind of thing we're doing now. If we were trying to do a Zoom conference and I was on a geostationary satellite, the performance would be patchy. It wouldn't be smooth and fluid the way this is. Even things like web surfing are interactive. It turns out when you get a web page, it's not just one transaction, but many transactions back and forth between the client and the server to get down the data and the videos and whatnot. That's nice. The bad problem is the footprint is small, but this is the really big one. The orbit time is only about 2 hours, depending on exactly how high it is. And what that means is the satellite from a given point on Earth will become visible over the horizon, move across the sky, and then disappear. And that means that your antenna, your user terminal, has to be very complex. It has to be able to track the satellite as it's moving across the sky, and it also has to be able to, just in a fraction of a second, switch from one satellite to another when it disappears. Okie doke. Now let's go on. So here's kind of what's happening today in LEO satellites with a little historical context. Just to throw this in, that the whole idea of using satellites for communication was invented in 1945 by a science fiction writer, Arthur C. Clarke. You've probably, maybe you've seen some of his movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey. But he came up with the idea that a geostationary satellite could in fact be used for communication just after the war. In the 1990s, early 2000s, a company called Teledesic tried to do a low Earth orbiting satellite constellation. And you can kind of see this animation here. It didn't work. They only planned to do 840 satellites, but by 2002, they were broke, and they had big money behind them. Bill Gates and a Saudi prince and a mobile phone operator, entrepreneur. And people a lot of times they'll say, oh, this didn't work for Teledesic, maybe it won't work today. But that's really irrelevant. You can guess the rocket technology, the electronics technology, and more important, the market is very different today than it was in the 1990s. So today, the industry there are kind of half a dozen or so players that are kind of actively trying to do LEO satellite constellations. Let me just say a quick word about each one. SpaceX is probably the best known. Elon Musk is a well-known guy. They had him SpaceX. They have a big lead right now in technology. They're the only company that can reuse the rockets that they use to launch satellites. They have big rockets that can launch a lot of satellites. They're really effective at the manufacture of satellites. And they are the only one of these companies that's serving anybody now. They call it a beta test, but they are offering service in the northern United States and have plans to expand soon to the southern Canada, and then following that will be Germany and the rest of the world. So they have a big lead, but it's not all over. OneWeb is a company that, like SpaceX, wants to go after the end user as well as other markets. They went bankrupt about a year ago. They reorganized and have come out of bankruptcy. They're now owned primarily by the UK government and by a large Indian internet service provider who has clients in parts of Asia and Africa as well. So they are well positioned in that sense, in that they've got good inroads into the market, and they are also the only other one that has launched what will be production satellites. Telesat is a Canadian company, and they're not going to focus at first on the kind of the home user, the end user. They're going to focus on things like mobile backhaul and kind of enterprise things, larger customers, Wi-Fi hotspots and communities. And they have a nice advantage in that they are a project of a company that has a very large geostationary satellite business right now. And they recently got some funding from the Canadian government to help them provide rural connectivity in Canada. The next two, Wang and Hengyan, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing them right because they're Chinese, and they are again late to the party, but they've got all the resources, the financial and also technical resources of the Chinese government behind them, and the real political advantage of being, the world's kind of bifurcating a little bit. The internet is, people use that expression, the splinter net, in kind of competition between the US and China with their digital Silk Road project. They're trying to expand rapidly around the world. And last but not least is Project Kuiper, which is being funded by Jeff Bezos. He's committed to put up $10 billion to make it work. And he, again, not only do they have money, but they have the advantage of being able to have access to Amazon's ground infrastructure and all their data centers and data services. So all of these, even though SpaceX is way ahead today, excuse me, I think it's safe to say that if this works out, these are the very early days, and there will be room for all of these. Moving on. Just say real quickly something about the potential markets. The one that I think we're focusing on maybe today, and which gets the most kind of press, is homes, individual users, or maybe a small business, but people that just have an end user terminal. But there are other markets that are perhaps less price sensitive, and that all these companies are also very much thinking of connecting ships at sea, putting down Wi-Fi hotspots in rural areas, connecting to airplanes as they're flying, connecting, mobile phone stations out in rural areas, connecting enterprises, sometimes that need really fast connectivity, community centers, governments, and so forth. It goes on and on. The picture I showed here is a picture of a Microsoft mobile data center. And what that is something that can be put on the back of a truck and just plunk down anywhere. And as long as they can get power to it, and the reason that it kind of fits into the satellite picture is that SpaceX just did a deal with Microsoft where they are going to be providing internet connectivity to Microsoft's Azure network and to ground stations into portable ground stations like this. So they'll be able to set up a data center anywhere in a very short order. Okie doke. Challenges. Okay, this thing is not a slam dunk. Elon Musk even says, his goal is to not go bankrupt. The first one I put there is kind of the most interesting, maybe. It's finding viable business model, or the most relevant to this conversation, because the fixed costs are so high for an internet constellation. I think, and the cost of signing up a new customer, serving a customer, is very low. I think that it's going to turn out that the business model, there are a lot of unknowns, but I think almost for sure there will be variable prices in different regions. That is, it's good news, because that says that in essence, the more affluent countries are going to pay more, and this will be kind of good for, or at least tend to heal the digital divide. Going down that list of technical factors, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. One factor, one technical thing that has to be overcome is the cost of the user terminals. Remember, I said they're really complex. They have to be in constant motion and constantly switch. And SpaceX in their initial beta test is charging $500 for the terminal. But they're losing money doing that. So the cost of bringing the low cost terminals are a technical barrier that has to be overcome. And I think it will be with mass production and improved technology. Right now, the second one, inter-satellite laser links, communication links. Right now, the satellites can't communicate amongst themselves, but SpaceX and is definitely committed to developing to adding that feature to their future satellites. And that will have a really nice effect. It'll both lower latency, it'll lower the need for ground station for terrestrial infrastructure. So I think that's technical. I think it'll be overcome. The reflected light mitigation has to do with astronomers that complain about the satellites getting in the way of their observations. That's being worked on jointly by the satellite companies and the astronomy community. Spectrum sharing, how do you, when a satellite is transmitting, how do you keep it from interfering with satellites above and below it? Again, it's got political aspect to it, and the ITU is very much, in the center of that, but it's a technical problem, basically. Avoiding collisions is both a technical problem and a little bit political. That's why I put it at the end. People have to track these satellites and predict where their orbits are going to go. And then if it looks like there's a confluence, a collision possibly coming up, you have to have communication between the operators of the satellites if it's two satellites. You don't want one to do a maneuver that raises their satellite and another one that's in danger also raising their satellite at the same time. So that requires data sharing, and it requires collaboration in the mitigation in planning maneuvers to avoid collisions. And that gets exacerbated by the fact that not only are we talking about these commercial applications, but governments are doing military applications, and they don't like to talk about the status, the orbits of their satellites. All of that leads to the political things, and I just quickly listed three. I think that we heard a bunch in the previous talk, worrying about security, about autocratic uses like surveillance of people and censorship and whatnot. The Chinese and American or Western global influence battle that's going on now is definitely a political problem. I think maybe, who knows, with the Biden administration, it'll ease up a little bit. And then there are vested interests. The terrestrial internet providers in a country may also be resisting competition. Okie doke. The final slide I have is kind of, I think, I don't know, kind of self-evident from the other. There has to be a role of, by the UN. These satellites, these constellations are global infrastructure. They're not belonging to any nation, and certainly not to any private company like Amazon or SpaceX. You just saw there are half a dozen efforts to do LEO satellites. And if you go a bit further and look at space in general, there are 68 nations that either launch, own, or operate satellites. And these LEO broadband satellites are, again, themselves from the US, Canada. OneWeb is UK and India, and then a couple from China. Though I think that China watchers think those two may be merged into one, but right now there are two. Anyhow, so we need global collaboration. We need laws, standards, regulation. And I don't know, we've managed to pull it off on the high seas, so hopefully we'll pull it off in space as well. And that's what I have.
Thank you so much, Larry. Yeah, as you said, you'll make that presentation, those slides available, which is great, at your email address.
The slides are annotated. They have a lot of notes underneath them. If it's not just the pictures.
Slides and more. That's fantastic. I think we all learned a lot. Not least of which is maybe even if governments have a fairly limited role right now, they certainly have a number of vested interests across the security, political, and commercial realms. So for that reason, I think it's appropriate that we go next to Jenny Stein. Jenny Stein from the U.S. State Department is a special advisor for internet freedom and business and human rights in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the State Department. And yeah, Jenny, can you tell us a little bit more about work you've been doing around those security and privacy aspects of internet services and how it might portend for this sector?
Sure, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation to speak. And while I don't pretend to be an expert on satellite delivered internet, I recognize there are possible links to surveillance capabilities associated with the technology. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I want to highlight the possibilities, invite you all to think about human rights due diligence opportunities and challenges linked to evaluating possible government misuse, including safeguards. So as you might be aware, the State Department recently released a due diligence guidance document designed to help U.S. companies keen on ensuring that their technology or services with surveillance capabilities are not used to violate or abuse human rights by government actors. The guidance document has been a culmination of a nearly 2-year-long process that has involved broad stakeholder engagement that both involved civil society and industry colleagues. Too often, we find that technologies with surveillance capabilities are misused by foreign governments to stifle dissent, harass human rights defenders, intimidate minority communities, discourage whistleblowers, chill free speech, target political opponents, journalists, and lawyers, or also to interfere arbitrarily or unlawfully with privacy. So given all of that, we released the guidance document in an effort to help businesses concerned about their products or services being misused to this end. The guidance itself outlines a series of due diligence measures in line with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and also the OECD guidelines that companies should take to mitigate the risk that products or services with surveillance capabilities will be misused by governments to violate or abuse human rights. The guidance familiarizes business with human rights terminology, and then it also offers them a greater understanding of the human rights concerns the U.S. government may have with certain transactions. The guidance also helps businesses conduct a human rights impact assessment on relevant products or services, and then provides businesses with a series of considerations that they should weigh prior to engaging in transactions with foreign governments. So now, in terms of application of this guidance to satellite-delivered internet, the definition section of the guidance document makes clear that this technology fits within the purview of the document. And I might add that this document can be publicly available. I'm happy to share. I'll share the link to the document in the chat function at the end of my presentation. The document defines products or services with surveillance capabilities as those that can be marketed for or used with or without the authorization of the business to detect, monitor, intercept, collect, exploit, preserve, protect, transmit, and or to retain sensitive data, identifying information or communications concerning individuals or groups. The definition also includes examples of products covered by the guidance. So one such category of products is non-cooperative location tracking. So that is clearly a prime capability of satellite-delivered internet. So as satellite-delivered internet falls within the scope of the guidance, providers should heed its due diligence recommendations. So I've outlined a couple of them. This would include undertaking a human rights impact assessment of satellite internet as a technology. As noted, the end user is inherently locatable in satellite communications. So this is an important risk in oppressive countries that have the political will and ability to search out users for violating censorship laws, for example. This would lead then to conducting a review of the human rights record of the government before the provision of internet services and conducting broad stakeholder engagement with impacted groups. Satellite-delivered internet companies will also need to do in-depth due diligence on local laws and regulations that implicate surveillance, including those involving data requests, of course. This will be particularly relevant and important as the world transitions from expensive and rare satellite internet to ubiquitous and inexpensive satellite internet. Given these challenges, among others, providers will need to put in place appropriate human rights safeguards to protect against misuse. There are a few safeguards that stand out as especially relevant. This includes building human rights considerations into any contractual agreement with governments and putting in place a sound grievance mechanism, and then also, of course, developing robust public reporting, including around transparency involving data requests. Assuming that we have some good time at the end, I'm also curious to hear from participants in today's session what kind of human rights safeguards satellite-delivered internet companies might implement to protect against misuse for surveillance purposes by governments. For instance, could these companies come up with security by design features to protect against interception and location tracking? Or could they provide for data minimization to protect against data requests? Just a few ideas, and I'll leave my comments here, but I'm more than happy to take questions on the guidance document and look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, please continue using the chat. There's some great questions and the Q&A. I think there's questions about encryption and how encrypted traffic might work over satellite connections where bandwidth might be limited, and many other great questions in there. Let's get to some of our last folks who will give remarks. I want to throw to Felix Blanc from Internet Sans Frontières quickly to bring his perspective and some of the work that he's done around submarine cable deployments and ways to protect human rights and safeguard the public interest that might be applicable, as Jenny said, to this sector.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Thank you for this invitation. I'm working on submarine cables for a couple of years now. And of course, the question is always, will the satellites at some point overcome in some ways or come back, so to say? And it is especially interesting because I have worked on a cable called ELA-Link between Europe and Latin America. And this cable was designed for astronomical observations and to enable the labs that are in Europe to connect with the astronomical observatory in the Paranal in Chile. And a part of the capacity, which is 72 terabits, will be devoted to academia and research. And it will be active next year. So it's very important milestone in the history of submarine cables. And it's ironically, when I look at Elon Musk and all this new adventure in space, I'm looking back to the submarine cables. Of course, it's strange because they are here to empower, so to say, astronomers. And an Elon Musk project have raised a big appraisal, so to say, among astronomers, because for observatory, it's very problematic. You will find statement by International Union, Astronomic Union about that. But I will only give a few very quickly, like 5, 6, 7 items to compare submarine cables and satellite. Of course, in terms of regulation, it's similar because you have the UN UNCLOS, like the International Convention on the Law of the Seas, and it's from 82. And for submarine cable, it's the basis on which some regulation is possible. But it's the same with satellites. And the problem is that the US, for instance, there is a we say that it's not, we cannot consider space as a commons because it's open for profits or for and the point here is how will future government cooperate and for new treaties for low orbits from these low Earth orbits constellations, because it's very problematic. For environments, the submarine cables are quite okay, let's say, because they are not, it's limited impacts in terms of environments. But you have with this possible debris in the space, it's one of the major issue in case of accidents, that we cannot even access to the space, so to say, or to put new objects in orbits. So it's very potentially it's highly problematic. In terms of costs, I find the figures that it's 48 billion since 1919 for the submarine cables, all submarine cables, and now invested for only this year and next year is 7 billion for the submarine cables. And you have with 10 billion for the Starlink project, only the Starlink project, not the others. 10 billion in total, which is already a big amount. So the question is, what will be the total amounts of investment? So it's a more question for the next 4 years. In terms of latency, there is a lot of investment nowadays, because in the same ways as in the 19th century, between London and Paris, you have these financial interests at stake with the first telegraph. Here you have the financial interest also at stake in some ways, because latency is supposed to be lower with laser beam and all the devices working. From one point, for instance, let's say Johannesburg, London, it's pretty quicker with satellites than with submarine cables. So but there is a lot of if all works correctly, technically, it will be quicker in terms of latency. But the problem is in terms of capacity for the digital divide, for instance, will it be enough to cover all the needs in terms of connectivity on data? Submarine cable now are in terabits, like 172 terabits for cable Maria from Facebook. The question is, will it be the same with these satellites? I have no answer, but it's a question again. And in terms of state control, of course, it's as you know, Snowden and the Snowden revelation, submarine cables are very decisive and critical for state surveillance, and they have been in the past, and they are still now. And we put some. I've heard that we can have some hope with satellites to have direct connectivity and to circumvent states in some case. But the problem with which projects, with Musk project, I don't know. But there is a lot of, for instance, community networks or other projects that could use the space for their own circumvention project, for instance. And the question is, will it be open for that kind of project, given that only 5 or 6 states can launch vehicles or can? So that was my concluding remark. But of course, we can have a lot of hope, and there is already projects with satellites to circumvent state surveillance or state censorship. But the question is, given that it's really concentrated as an industry, even more concentrated than the marine cables, is it possible to give space for using space as a freedom launcher, so to say? So that was my concluding remark.
Thank you, Felix. I love that, the idea of space as a freedom launcher. And really tough questions there that kind of mirror what we're seeing in the chat and Q&A about state sovereignty and state control, which we might go back to Jennifer to ask about. But first, yeah, you also raised a circumvention and getting back to the start of Felicia's introduction about these intentional disruptions of connectivity and whether satellite might provide a way to route around that sort of blocking. So we do have a practitioner, last but not least, Ahmad Ahmedian of Net Freedom Pioneers actually runs a service that effectively does deliver access to information via satellite. So Ahmad, can you tell us more about your service and then also your thoughts on what you're hearing?
Sure, definitely. Thank you, Peter and Felicia, for organizing this IGF conference or webinar. I learned a lot. And as you mentioned, the topic is satellite. And one of the main issues is access to information, right, around the globe, the places that they do not have access to internet due to the government control or, lack of connectivity or broadband infrastructure. So Net Freedom Pioneers, I try to keep it short so we have, time for Q&A. I see a lot of, great questions to be answered. So at Net Freedom Pioneers, we realized, after the government, took more control of the internet inside Iran by establishing, national infrastructure, to have more control over internet, and for some instances, throttling the internet access or blocking, websites, or, last year and right now, it's the first anniversary of the one of the longest internet shutdowns, 10-day of internet shutdown inside Iran. We developed this technology basically, based on satellite, which has great advantages. Which one is these geostationary satellites. These are in international spaces and they can broadcast to anywhere in the world without asking for permission from the governments. Of course, there are some complexities to that. But if I could just, I can get to the core technology that we developed. And I do have this presentation if everyone can see it. So yeah, as you can see in this technology, we basically utilize the satellites, the TV signals that could be broadcasted over satellite or any digital terrestrial TV network. So we bundle the content, which we work with different publishers, with internet activists or human rights activists, and media publishers that their content is blocked inside country. We aggregate those contents, which amounts to 4 to 6 gigabytes of content, and we convert it into a video stream. So once we do have that video stream and the content is embedded into that enables us, to tap into infrastructures like, DTT, or in case of Iran, satellite, and broadcast it to the TV screens at homes. And then, people on their end, they can record the channel like as if that they are recording their favorite show, to watch it later. And then they use their software, a very small software on their Android devices or, laptops to decode that video stream and get access to the content. And that content is any format of files, anything that you can store on your computer, you can embed into that video stream, and people can decode it and access to that, which, the benefits of the satellite, you can see it's accessible by everyone. It couldn't be censored. Of course, the governments are utilizing some jamming techniques to jam the signal and interfere with the broadcasting, but still, we've been able to have this built-in data packet recovery mechanism, so it recovers the lost files. And of course, we do our coverage is over Iran. The main audience are in Iran, but the coverage, extends to the whole Middle East and also, East Asia, and many millions of people, especially in developing countries, they use satellite to watch TV, and they are able actually to tune into this channel and get files without having access to any internet infrastructure, or in remotest areas they can get the files. And yeah, I mean, the cases are, refugee camps, emergency responses, and, bypassing censorship, as I mentioned, and rural areas and remote areas. And data casting is becoming one solution to bridge the digital divide, even inside the US during the pandemic. They are utilizing the data casting over the DTT or satellite broadcasting. But yeah, we are looking forward to see the expansion of LEOs, satellite internet, all around the world, and hopefully that's going to be a launch freedom launch, actually, for, as Felix mentioned, for the global connectivity, and no one can interfere. But it poses a lot of risk, having the sudden accessibility to the content and fast expansion. One is like, misinformation. Groups like Access Now, ourselves are working, to bring digital literacies and just, critical thinking on the internet, in internet space. But this fast expansion of the internet access, poses a lot of risk, and the social media expansions that pose a lot of risk, and the governance of the international governance didn't exist to have some compliances in place, so those social media companies they can follow and mitigate these risks. So yeah, I mean, civil society has an important role to basically gear up for the fast expansion of the internet in those areas, and pushing the private companies actually to follow some human rights compliances too, and not regulate based on the will of the countries like Iran or China. So provide internet access to those people.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's good to have this optimism. I think while we acknowledge that there are a lot of lessons have been learned from the rollout of new platforms and services, bringing a lot more people online. So I want to underscore Jenny's request of everyone to really think of ways that due diligence and human rights due diligence and environmental impact studies can help to prevent and mitigate all these adverse effects. Great. Does any of the panelists have questions for each other? I'd like to leave that open as we kind of reflect on what's being raised by the attendees.
I'd like actually to pose a question to Larry. One of the challenges that we had, over the video broadcasting was jamming, right? Satellite jamming, although it's a kind of, international violation of international ITU laws, especially the ones that Cubans, they target the satellite in the space. I wonder, does it also apply to LEOs, and does the government, do the governments can interfere with those internet service operations by some similar techniques? And is it kind of international violation of international laws, or they can justify it by their sovereignty laws?
Okay. Yeah, excuse me. I think that I think the answer to that is that I don't know, but I doubt whether SpaceX, for example, is going to get permission to broadcast not broadcast, but to narrowcast to specific antennas and end users locations within, let's say, Cuba. And so what's going to happen there, if Cuba is willing to accept them as a service provider, or Iran, is they will say, okay, anything that you have, any traffic you have talking to people in our country, it has to go through a national gateway and then be distributed terrestrially under our control. So the idea, and I think the only thing maybe a little close to that is if you could sneak an end user terminal into a place near the border, maybe you could have somebody on the other side of the border in a free nation, so to speak, do a point-to-point connection to that one person. But I think, I can't imagine that any of those companies are going to violate, are going to serve a country that won't let them serve, that wants them to go through a gateway. That very much happened. Like OneWeb had a deal for distribution. They were pretty tight before they went bankrupt in Russia. And then Russia said, no, they changed their mind. They really want everything to have to go through a gateway. And they say it's for national security purposes, but maybe not.
Thanks. And I think, yeah, you referred to the commercial interests of the existing telecom companies, right? And the terrestrial providers, as you said.
That happened in Russia too. I'm sure that was part of the OneWeb kerfuffle.
Great. Thanks. Any other questions between panelists?
I can ask a question about, I think that I had posed this question, and I'd just be interested if anyone, maybe Larry, if you have thoughts or any others, just thinking about this technology, are there human rights safeguards that we could think about now in terms of encouraging satellite delivered internet companies to start to think about? I know I mentioned contractual safeguards, but are there other actual technical features that we could think about and encouraging?
Well, encryption is that's something that works. But the truth, I was listening to your thing and trying to think, are there any kind of essential differences between in the context that you're raising between cabled or satellite? And my first thought is maybe not. I think you said the satellite operator knows the physical location of the antenna that it's talking to. But in order for the government to find out that physical location, the satellite operator has to cooperate with them. And that seems that's the same thing. If somebody wants to know, where a certain IP address was at a certain time when it's on a cable, it's the same thing. The internet service provider has to be willing to cooperate. So maybe I'm wrong, but at first blush, it seems like, getting SpaceX to reveal information is the same as getting AT&T to reveal information, or a cable, a cable company. In the United States, it takes a court order. I'm not sure. Can anybody else think of why am I being short-sighted?
That's a great general question. I don't think we can answer that. So that's a good point, that we still might recreate a situation where a rather limited number of companies operating in a limited number of great power countries are in control of a lot of data around the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have questions in the chat around the Outer Space Treaty, around who's responsible for all this junk that's being put up. Is it the ITU, or does the ITU just coordinate and put that responsibility on the launchers or the countries?
Okay, I'll say something about that. Is a big problem. And when I went through my little issues or something, that was the kind of the biggest one, I think, because it's both technical and political. And for example, who is tracking these things and trying to avoid collisions? And yes, like for example, the United States government does that, and that's pretty much open and cooperating with others. Though I'm not at all clear that they are willing to include in the data sharing and whatnot that goes on military satellites and that kind of thing. I don't know. But yeah, the US government, for example, tracks right now, it just got improved, but objects that are in orbit down to 10 centimeters for a long time, and just recently went on the air down to smaller things. That being said, there are also, I know of at least two companies which are two commercial companies, one which is already operating and one which is startup mode, which will be providing similar services from the United States, private companies. And they are offering the one that's already operating is, I think, sets the, I don't know, the template.
I think we got to wrap here, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay. Bottom line is couple private companies are coming online. The US government is doing something about it, but it doesn't work if everybody doesn't cooperate. The Chinese have to cooperate with the Americans, for example.
That's a great note. I want to leave 1 last minute if any of the panelists wanted to offer voluntary commitments to further the goals of the IGF and specific to this session. If anyone had any commitments they wanted to make or put on the record or charges to put to others.
I'm willing to help, but what do you need?
Great. That's an offer of cooperation. I think for Access Now, Felicia probably plans to continue watching the development of the satellite sector and how it might impact human rights. And likewise for others. Can we get a head nod from the panelists? All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I learned a ton. I think we can see in the chat that there's a lot of great questions across the technical and the political and the policy. And that's what we see coming in this sector. And that's why we need that cooperation, I think, that Larry charged us with. So I want to thank all the attendees for coming and thank Ahmad, Felicia, Jenny, Larry, Felix, and then Eleanor at the IGF staff for helping put this on.
Well, thank you for organizing.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey.
Bye.